Welcome back to the Healing Chronicles podcast. Today's episode is a special one and honestly a little bit emotional for me too.
We're joined today by someone who's not just an expert in health and transformation, but someone who's walked through the fire and rebuilt their life from the ground up.
John is my coach. He's the reason I made it through bodybuilding preps with Crohn's disease, photo shoots, flare-ups and mindset meltdowns. And today he's here to share his story of overcoming kidney failure, heart disease and coming back stronger to win bodybuilding competitions and help hundreds of others heal too.
So if you've ever felt like your body is broken or that healing isn't possible for you, this episode will change your perspective. We talk peptides, resistance training, mindset, PCOS, chronic illness, and everything in between.
It's raw, it's real, and it's proof that your diagnosis is not your destiny.
So how did you meet originally?
I was a coach for bodybuilding when I first met Katie, and she contacted me through a friend who I'd done work with. So at that time I was working with the military, and we were teaching the military physical trainers how to be better trainers and work with operatives that are going out to conflict zones, that kind of stuff. So we worked with those guys to improve their strength, physical performance, and they could then teach these guys how to be better soldiers, realistically. And this was with Navy and all the way through to Special Forces. And it included things like nutrition. And it was good because we ended up going on to their sort of syllabus, and we started teaching the military as their sole provider. And at that point, we were also inviting civilians onto our courses where they got clearance to come onto the course, and they'd also learn similar things. And I think through one of those guys that came on the course who knew Katie, he referred Katie to me for her goals. And then we started speaking, and I became Katie's personal trainer or coach for her endeavors in bodybuilding and bikini. So, and that's where it began. I went down to Essex and met her there, and we sort of struck it off, and then it began from that point. So it's going back quite a long way.
Many moons.
Yeah.
Amanda was in the army for a while.
Oh, okay, nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting how it's like all of our stories are intertwining somehow.
Yeah. I must say I really enjoy working with the military. It's a very different level of interaction. And it's, for me, being there for such a long time, I was there for quite a number of years, and learning the way the guys operate, it became like a family. Going back there every so often, because I was doing repeat courses, so everything had like a level. There's a level 1 strength conditioning and so on. We'd go back to all the bases, some abroad, and see the same guys, and it was like a really nice family environment as well. So it was nice to get back and be welcomed and feel part of the team, to be fair. So it was a really good learning experience. And obviously you end up working with a lot of people. And even today, I think I was contacted by a guy who I did a nutrition course with in 2006. And he recalled me from that course, and we're going to do some more work with him now. So now he's in the role of being a chief in his department. He wants me back again. So clearly I was memorable then. So, but it's a really nice way of looking back at some of the influences you can have on people and pay it forward. So it's kind of like he managed to affect quite a lot of lives, which has been really nice.
The brotherhood of the military is like no other.
Yeah.
That I've experienced.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and it's a very strong bond. And also working with guys, I think that's so important for those guys to have that. So I worked in the areas of soldiers coming back from conflict zones who've been injured severely, so they'd lost limbs, and there was a special place where they would go for rehabilitation, both physically and mentally, after their injuries. And that was a really nice place to work as well. So because you learn a lot about the human condition, and sometimes understanding the difference between a successful recovery and one that isn't quite successful is very interesting, and what makes the difference between those two situations. So there's a lot of learning going on from my perspective.
Yeah, that's something that I'm super interested in hearing more about. And maybe kind of comparing notes on your experience with that kind of setting versus my experience with the Canadian military would be interesting to compare the two.
Yeah. I think, but you learn personally from it as well. So, when I was working with the guys that had lower limb injuries, they'd lost a leg, you get things like phantom limb pain. Even though the limb isn't there, it's still painful, and the nervous system is thinking it's still there. So we do work with putting a leg into a box with a mirror in it. So the brain sees two legs because the image is deflected. So the brain sees that leg, and then the pain dissipates. There's a whole process that goes into that, but the end result is that person feels that they can deal with the pain because the leg is still there. So they can have itchy legs, or an itchy leg that isn't actually present. So when they see the leg in the mirror, they can scratch that leg and it relieves the itch that isn't really there. It's a psychological, neurological itch. And it's really interesting how that affects the way the brain operates. And then years down the road, I tore my bicep off powerlifting. I was doing strongman. And obviously I had it reattached. And then to train my bicep, I would use the mirror technique because I couldn't use the arm was in a sling. But so I didn't lose muscle mass in the same way I would do by being immobilized. I would train the other arm, but use a mirror, and my brain would understand that they're both being used. It's so interesting. So those kind of like learning.
Wild.
Yeah, the brain's very interesting when it comes to like applying techniques to help people recover. And that was one of the really interesting ones that we found was the brain's very smart, but we can use the way it sees things to be a benefit by sort of tricking it slightly. So that was a really nice outcome. So and you learn personally from that, and they can use it further down the line, even for your own benefit as well, which is what I did.
That's insane. Okay, let's go back to your journey and start at the beginning when you were diagnosed with kidney failure and heart disease.
Yeah. So it was a place where I was heavily into bodybuilding, and I was pushing my weight up as far as I could go with it, because in the off season for bodybuilders, when you're competitive, when we're talking about an extreme sport, so I just wanted to separate out the fact that the bodybuilding lifestyle is in most cases a healthy way of living. But when you become to a competitive level in even most sports, it becomes unhealthy because you're pushing the boundaries all of the time. And for someone competing in bodybuilding, you're pushing consistently, and you're pushing against the body's will to do what it wants to do. Homeostasis is not something you're looking for, and health isn't the main goal. It's being as big as possible. So at that point, I'm pushing my weight up, eating lots of food. And at that point, you start to like develop things like sleep apnea. So you don't breathe properly because your neck's big and you're really heavy. And you're expecting to be uncomfortable because walking around with extra mass on your body is never great, but it's one of the objectives of getting more muscular. And then you'd go through a process of then dieting down to get into a competition appearance through changing the way you eat and a little bit of training. So with that in mind, the desire to push hard and put the feelings to one side is great in most cases, but in a lot of cases, you're ignoring some of the signals your body is telling you, which is what I did. So I reached a very high body weight, and my body was unhappy with it. So, and without really understanding, I was doing my blood work. So I was doing blood work and blood markers regularly, and everything was in a good place. But then within a space of 3 months, my kidney function dropped from a normal range of an EGFR of 90 to about 30. So it dropped significantly, which is now is renal failure. So when I was diagnosed with that, there was also other tests done at the same time. And they then came back and said to me, you've also got heart failure, and it's severe heart failure, which is diagnosed as an ejection fraction, which is most of our left ventricle fills with blood, and you pump out with a squeeze of the heart. You pump out around 70% of that blood. So you have the residual part of blood left in that chamber of your heart. Mine was pumping out like 32% rather than 70. So it's basically heart failure. So at that point, it's because the load I've been putting on my body was too much. It was just like, we've had enough, and things started to break down. At that point, when I was feeling those things, my mindset was to push on, push hard. And you just do that as an athlete. So it's masked by that desire to be the best. And at that point, diagnosis comes in, and it just changes your life in an instant. So, when that happens, it's like you readjust everything. And I think at that point, you have a serious decision to make, which you have to process for a while. And at that point, it was looking at where my outcome would be if I was to continue doing what I was doing. And realistically, without any sort of change in lifestyle, it was around 6 years I had left to sort of be around, which is not a lot of time. So you then have to make a decision about what you're going to do with that knowledge. And you either change or you don't. So it was interesting. But I think the situation allowed me to discover much more about my state of mind, my mental health, and also as in like the strength of the personality, where, I could redirect that ability to push hard into working to get better. And in spite of lots of information to the contrary, I believed I was going to change it and basically reverse it. And that was part stubbornness because I wouldn't let go. And yeah, that's what I did. So it was a big shock. It's a big shock of an event. You just sometimes believe what you're doing is going to be okay and it won't happen to you kind of thing, but it does if you're not doing the right thing. So yeah, that was a diagnosis. Gave me sort of 6 years to live. And I set about immediately changing things.
That I can relate to that so much in the way that you described that your mission was to be the best, to put on size, to push yourself past your comfort zone. And I can relate to that so much in the military mentality because you're taught the same and you're taught to train past the pain and you're taught to keep going even though you want to stop and ignore those signals from your body. And that's so interesting to hear you describe it because it just puts me back to where I was when I was training. And ultimately that mindset of pushing yourself past the signals from the body is what ended me in the same situation with a chronic illness, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a current sort of ideology or principle, which is, 24/7, there's no rest days, keep pushing. And if you don't work hard, you're not going to make it. But there's also that time where you have to recover. You have to take breaks, and that is considered to be possibly a weakness now in some of the things you see on Instagram in the fitness industry, particularly. If someone's going to outwork you, you've got to be the hardest working person in the room. And to a point, you do have to work hard, but it has to be balanced. And I think we can get very caught up if you're that mindset where you can push hard, then you can go astray with that a little bit. And it leads to a breakdown of your health, which is what, that happened.
Yeah. And then I think for a lot of people, when we get to that breakdown point, we look at things in a very black and white way where we're either achieving and we're progressing or we're not. And it can be like we spoke about in our last episode, talking about this all or nothing mindset where we're you're either winning or you're old news, you're forgotten.
Yeah. I think we've got this very basic duality. It's like those two things, it's on or off. And there's so much in between. And that's the place where you have to spend some more time thinking about what is really important. It's so easy to do, particularly. And this is why I think the message that we send out to people about even what success is, where that lies, is so important as well. And it's all contextual as well. So, it is, for some people, very easy to push past the pain barrier, keep pushing. But I do find that there's an also head in the sand kind of attitude for people where, when I get clients on board now, I'll say to them, let's do a blood test. That's the first thing I ask you to do, is so I can see what's happening under the hood. Even for people who aren't in sport, they may be regular people. I'm like, let's do a blood test. Let's see where things are. And a lot of people don't want to understand. They don't want to see it. They don't want to know. So there's that kind of like, I don't want to understand where I'm at because I'm going to have to change, because change is difficult. And if you're comfortable with what you're doing, even though that may be uncomfortable, it's familiar behavior where you feel comfortable in it. So you regress to that familiar behavior because you've always done it. And you don't want to be able to be told by a situation or a person to change, because that's very difficult. And then that's growth, which is a different kind of growth, which is very hard.
Right? So you've gone from being chronically unwell to essentially, you won a bodybuilding show, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think really helped you shift out of the dysfunction and like back into health?
Well, firstly, I had no choice. It was like, this is where I think the word rock bottom is so important, because you've got nowhere less to go. You make a decision not to be a victim, or you can change. And that takes a significant amount of effort and bravery as well, because you have to accept the fact that you've done this. It's like the acceptance of saying, why did this occur? And many people would ask me, why did this happen? And was it bodybuilding? Was it eating too much food? And give me a reason. And it's always multi-layered. There's a number of things that happened. So, my personal perspective on achievement and my addictive personality, they're all parts to play in this whole ball game. But you get to that place where you have no choice. You're a change or you don't make it. So it was like, I'm going to make it. I've got other things that are more important to live for. And that's what was the challenge. It's like, I need to turn this around. And I'm actually quite an experiment with things anyway. I'm a very curious guy. So I had another job to do. It was a task where I was like, I'm going to reverse this kidney failure and I'm going to do everything I can to do it. And that became my mission. So I switched missions to that. And I find that when athletes particularly get injured, they're like, oh, I see a negative in that. I'm going to lose my muscle mass, or I'm not going to perform as well, or I'm not going to compete. And it's like, yeah, but you have a new mission, which is now to get healthy and to fix yourself. So now your training protocols, the way you see things changes for the end goal. The end goal is now different. It isn't to win your race or to win your show. It's now to get better. And if you can make that change and go, now my goal is different, you can apply the same intensity and level of performance to that goal. I think that is what helped me push through from that situation and ending up reversing the process. So, but it didn't come without its struggles, because people will tell you it's not possible.
I was going to say, you were probably faced with people in that scenario where they told you that you weren't going to get better.
Yeah, it's an impossibility. The level of kidney failure you have is irreversible. So you're going to basically get smaller and weaker, and you're going to lose the things that you have over time. And that's basically it. And there was plenty of discussions I had with consultants in the renal department, nephrologists. We had conversations, and we argued quite considerably about various topics. And at the end of the day, my response to them was, these are my kidneys, not yours. And I'm going to do all the things that I've learned to do research wise to do everything that I possibly can. And it's like make or break. So it's like, I now have learned, I spent time researching, because deep down I'm a geek, and I'm my head in books, learning as much as I could with all the most recent research about what to do and how things would work. And what I found at that point in time was that almost all medicines, which we can talk about as we go through this, are licensed for one purpose, but they're never used for that purpose. They're used for something else. So it's such a broad spectrum. So there's a medicine made, which is going to be used for. And in fact, the companies then release that medicine, and it has a completely different application in practical sense. And through research, I found that there are many medicines like that. And some of those things I applied to my situation, which the consultants didn't know about, because they're specialists in that area. So a nephrologist is going to be nephrology, whereas another person who works in, maybe sexual dysfunction is going to be sexual dysfunction. And some of the medicines like Cialis was pivotal in me regaining my kidney function. But yet a nephrologist would not understand that at all and has no scope to go research that either. So they were learning new things at the same time, which was quite interesting. So it was growth all around.
And then you get some consultants that just had absolutely no idea.
None. No. And they'd sit and Google stuff in front of me. So they're saying, you got to stop taking that. I'm like, why? Well, it's a herb, and herbs will bring your kidneys. What is it I'm taking? And I had no idea what it was. They're Googling it. And I'm like, you spelt it wrong. So I'm going to do what I'm going to do. These are my kidneys anyway. So it was very interesting. So, but we struck a balance at a point where they could see my results getting better, and they were like, okay, yeah, well, I say you can be part of the journey with me, or we can argue the whole time. It's entirely up to you. So we got on board with stuff, and we can be experimental together, and that's what actually ended up happening. So it was kind of cool in the end. So
It was super emotional when you won your bodybuilding show too.
yeah, it was interesting because it's something I wanted to do, and I thought that was never going to happen. When this obviously diagnosis happened, it was like, there's no way that I'm going to be able to be in the condition I need to be competitive. There's a whole section of the dieting phase where you drop body water through water regulation and sodium cycling and this kind of stuff, which is very heavy on the kidneys. And that clearly would not be a practicality for me in that state. So I thought that life was over for me. So to really get back and do that was really interesting. The one thing, and usually as an athlete, you think about your end result, your goal, and set targets for yourself. And realistically, the whole situation of going through this show and going to the championships and stuff was, when you win your category, you get interviewed at the end. And the main purpose for me was to be not win to win the show, win so I could stand in front of the microphone and explain my journey to everybody that was watching. That was the purpose. So it was kind of like a secondary thing to win, but winning gave me that ability to speak, which I took. So yeah, it was an interesting scenario, but it was great. So yeah, I was very happy with that.
In the moment of receiving your diagnosis and receiving that prognosis of if you keep going this way, you have 6 years to live. What was the guidance that you were given from the doctors and the specialists in that moment, as far as what you needed to do and what your life would look like moving forward?
That was very interesting. And it can be quite demotivating, because what we find in this, our medical industry over here, they're very cautious. So what happens is the advice that is given is always the worst case scenario, because they've covered all bases. So it means that if something doesn't go well and you do end up in the wrong place and you die, for example, they've covered that base. So it's like, we're going to give you this treatment, or we're going to offer you this sort of solution. But it comes with these risks, and it may or may not work, sort of thing. So if what unfortunately happened in the first instance was I was given the wrong advice and given, at that point in time, I was drinking like 5 liters of water a day as a large guy. And they said, they didn't tell me about a water restriction at all. They didn't mention that. They just said, we want you to eat no more than 2 grams of salt a day. So that was already, eating 2 grams of salt a day means I have to look at all of my nutrition completely and remove sodium in every sort of given place. So the meals that I was prepping for the week had to be completely changed. So my diet changed entirely. There are foods that you have to eliminate because they are stressful for your kidneys, and some foods you can put in because they're great for your kidneys. But I wasn't told about the water restriction. So I carried on drinking 5 liters of water. And then I was given the wrong dose of diuretics, which ended me back up in hospital, super dehydrated. My kidneys were worse for it. So what they'd kind of done is just look at the textbook, rather than looking at a guy with my statistics and looking at my needs specifically. They went, this is what we're going to do. This is what the guidance is. Off we go. So I ended up drinking, there was no more than 1 liter of water a day and no more than 2 grams of sodium a day, which was a massive change. That was really difficult, because after drinking 5 liters a day, drinking 1 was very difficult. So I took it upon myself to weigh myself before I trained in the gym, and weighed myself afterwards so I could see what weight I'd lost through water loss from sweating and perspiring. So on the days that I trained harder, which wasn't that hard at that time because we have to reduce stress, if I was training a large body group, I could drink more water that day because I'd sweated more out, which actually helped me, because not drinking was very difficult because you become thirsty. So that diagnosis was what it was, but then the advice I was given was not specific for me. And I ended up in hospital a couple of times because of it. And then they revised it and said, why are you taking this? Who told you to do this? It was you last week. So on. Yeah, it's you, mate. So yeah, they started to pay a bit more attention, because I was coming with questions as well, which I wanted answers to. And then we got it right. So that was the initial treatment was we're going to do this and we're going to manage your condition, but it is going to get worse. And eventually you'll be on dialysis and then it's kind of end of life and you're not going to get a kidney because you're too old. It's highly unlikely. And even in that place, you may get a kidney. It can last between 5 and 10 years if you're lucky. It all depends. But then that was never an option for me anyway, because in my mind, realistically, with my age, I was like, I don't really think I deserve a kidney either. So if as a younger person, honestly, it's like, at that time I was 52 years old and it's self-inflicted to a point. So I was being very pragmatic about it. And if as a younger person, a 23-year-old who needs to have a kidney, I would prefer those guys to get it rather than me. So, that wasn't an option. So me doing the right thing and fixing myself was the option I had. And that was the way I was going to go and not even think about that. And then most of the things that I did was research myself. And that's where you take responsibility for your own health and not leave it in someone else's hands. And that's where the healing came from.
Was there a moment before that kicked in? Like, are you a stubborn enough person that you were like, absolutely not, and just went, full into, I'm going to learn about this? Or was there a moment where you bought into that belief of that very low hope kind of prognosis?
There were the moments where you would think, this is it, I'm done for. But there were very small moments because, as you mentioned, I think there's a stubbornness in anybody who's been in the military or worked that way and has that desire to be the best and push hard. There's a stubbornness that you have. And I discussed like the coming to terms with possibly dying and what that meant and how to approach it. Because most people are scared of that kind of thing. So it was like, I need to start thinking about what this means and how I'm going to describe this to other people. And when I spoke to my clients about my situation, it was interesting how people around me responded to me having this situation. I may have 6 years to live. And watching that was very interesting. So I wanted to understand how to manage how I was feeling, but also the people around me, how they were feeling about the information I had to tell them. Because originally I wasn't going to tell my clients anything. But because I had to go to hospital so often, it was affecting my work with them. So I didn't want to give them a boo-hoo story. I wanted to give them a success story where I changed this around, but it ended up me being completely transparent, which was really good because it helped me on my journey and helped on theirs. And I learned how to deal with their emotions as well as my own. But I learned to sort of understand that, but there was still a stubborn streak in me, which I would not let go of. And I decided I'm not going to let go of it because it's what I've got left. It's all I've got left. And I'm going to use this and it's going to drive me to do all the things I need to do. So that stubbornness was really useful. It probably will put me in the place in the first time round, but then I used it as a positive when I had a different focus. So we said about stubbornness in the right place at the right time. Yeah. So
same stubbornness, but your trajectory changed. You just completely switched directions.
Yeah. And as I said before, I like experimented with things all my life with the way that things would affect me. So I'd see things in clinical research and go, that sounds great, but what is it like in practice? So I would use things and go, right, I'm going to try that and see what responses I get physically or from a body fat perspective, or is it going to improve my VO2 max, that kind of stuff. So I've always been experimenting. So I decided to disassociate slightly and go, you know what, I'm going to be my experiment and I'm going to do this and we're going to see what happens. And then I can apply that stubbornness to my disassociated sort of perspective of we're going to fix this. And this is what we're going to do. But there were moments. I think one of the things that I found as I was researching, you see the clinical trials that have happened before. And for a man, when you have kidney failure, what we see in kidney failure in adolescence, the rate of decline is very similar until guys and girls get to adolescence. And obviously boys start producing testosterone, and testosterone directly relates to the decline in kidney function. So your testosterone will decline naturally as you're going through the stages. So that meant for me that I'm going to become less masculine. I'm going to lose my muscle mass, growth hormone declines. So things like the things that I think most guys cling on to, which they find very interesting and very important for them, is masculinity, libido, appearance, and the capability physically. And all of that was going to disappear as I went through the stages of kidney failure. So that was something I had to get my head around because it was likely to happen. And if you go around and say to yourself, I'm going to take testosterone to try and stop that happening, then what you could do in effect is increase the rate of decline. So there's a way of looking at the situation and being wise in how you can potentiate the testosterone you still have without taking exogenous testosterone and making it worse. So I likened it to when ladies go through the menopause. Obviously, I'm never going to experience that, but from experience, ladies have said that they don't feel feminine anymore. They feel like they've lost their identity as being female. And I'd sit there and think, I'm going to lose my identity as a male because I'm losing my masculinity. And all the things that made me me and how other people saw me was like Big John. I didn't give myself that label. Other people did. And they see you a certain way. And I'm no longer going to be Big John. I'm going to be Small John. I'm going to be less muscular John. And that kind of like psychological change is something that was very interesting and difficult to deal with.
You just spoke to that way of thinking where at least you were educated enough and had enough foresight to know that it's not as simple as just, okay, there's a reduction in testosterone, let's take some synthetic testosterone. And I think that's such a common trap that people can fall into, to think of things in such a linear and dualistic way that, oh, I'm lacking in this, I'll just take some of that. And the more that I learn about nutrition and healing, recovery, all of this it's really not that simple. It's so much more complicated. And the body works in systems, not in this simplistic sort of way.
Yeah. And there's always a knock-on effect. You know, our body pulses and we have, negative feedback loops. So you do one thing, something else changes in response to that, especially hormones as well. So it's an interesting path to understand. And there are much better ways when you research it, as you said, when you put your mind to being able to understand the information that's in front of you and then make a wise decision. That's so important. And that isn't the kind of thing that we are taught by the medical professionals. They don't have any interest in that whatsoever. So that's on you to do that. So it took a great deal of research to work out what the best steps for me were nutritionally, and then lifestyle wise, training wise, and then obviously
psychologically as well.
Yeah, psychologically, because, there's people around you that want you to. I remember going out to eat with someone and it was interesting. They got really upset that I couldn't eat the food, that we were having sushi. And we asked a waitress if there was salt in the rice. Was it just boiled rice or sticky rice? Is there salt in it? She couldn't tell us. Went to find out, and there was salt in the rice, so I couldn't eat it. And that person got really upset because I couldn't eat the food and I was ruining their experience. So I said, if I was in a wheelchair, would you be still upset that I couldn't get into the restaurant? I needed help upstairs. She was like, of course not. Well, I'm now in a position where I have an illness and I have to work around it appropriately. So interesting how the psychological impact was sometimes lessened or brightened by the people around you who didn't understand. Interesting.
People have such an interesting relationship with food, and I find that they project their experience and their relationship with food onto other people. So just that experience of, you can't eat this, therefore the experience is ruined. It is such an interesting perspective.
I was a bit gobsmacked that was actually coming out of that person's mouth. I was taken aback, which was, I really can't believe you're saying this. And that I had to go away and process that for a while. It's incredible. Yeah.
And with that said, you've worked with so many people that have or had chronic illness now. So how do you explain inflammation and dysfunction in a way that almost makes sense to the everyday person?
Usually I start with the way food affects you. So they're having symptoms, inflammatory symptoms. So the bowels aren't working or they've got joint pain. Something is not right. And systemic inflammation, that, if someone's got asthma, for example, or even arthritis, there's those kind of situations, or someone's overtraining, there's inflammation there as well. So it can be from a disease perspective or a poor nutritional perspective. I I explain that inflammation is a natural response to the environment you're placing your body in, whether that's eating the wrong food, training the wrong way, or as a process of aging and to a degree. And we need to reduce that inflammation through a number of protocols. And there are some really useful ones out there which will help us to reduce inflammation really well. And one of the things is really interesting that cold plunges have become super popular, which athletes use consistently, which is great. So if you're competing, if you're doing high rock or you're doing CrossFit and you're doing a number of days in a row, then that's cool. You can get into a cold plunge after your performance and reduce inflammation with the cold plunge, which is great. And you can then perform better the next day. But while you're in training for that competition, you want to become as strong and as powerful and muscular as possible. And getting into a cold plunge post-exercise, if you're trying to build some muscle and strength, reduces your ability to be inflamed. And that inflammation is the signal for the cascade that comes afterwards to grow muscle and to get bigger and stronger. So cold plunges post-workouts are really a bad idea. So it's where you apply that stuff. And we've got other things like peptides, which can reduce inflammation, that don't do any of that. They don't reduce your ability to grow muscle or strength or any of that. So they work way better and they're much easier to do with less pain than going into a cold plunge. So I think there's understanding what it is by explaining the process of inflammation, how we get it, and then what we can do to reduce it. And again, that's lifestyle change as well.
Do you see that whole cold plunge trend as like a way that people are attempting to just forego the rest and recovery portion? Like they just want to speed it up because nobody wants to rest. Nobody wants to prioritize recovery because that's not the fun, sexy part, right?
No. I think they want a shortcut. And there are things that do help you. And there's no doubt that I've said to guys that have gone to the CrossFit Games to, cold plunge after their session because they're bruised and battered, and it does help them. But it's got to be applied, practically in the right way. And out of that context, it's not that great. So I think that if someone they have cold plunge on their program because it gives them some mental fortitude that they can get into a really cold ice bath, then there's some benefits there. But as long as they understand what it's doing for them, and if it is for mental fortitude, you can go out into the garden and sit into a cold plunge and it's great for you, then cool, go ahead and do it. But don't think it's going to be great for your improving muscle mass or performance while you're developing your skill or your performance ability. Your demonstration of your skill and your performance is one thing. Developing it in the gym or training for it is entirely different. So, but I think it's a little bit of a fad, and they come around every so often and people buy little pods and sit in it. And yeah, but I think it's a challenge for people. I think humans we need to be challenged. Having a very boring humdrum life is quite difficult for many people, and doing stuff that challenges you is innate in us. And I think that's another way that people find the challenge, and they've done something and they've achieved something by sitting in the cold plunge for a period of time.
I feel like a lot of people did that because they thought it would benefit them physically, and then it just kind of shifted into this more so mentality thing of like, I can sit in there for 3 minutes. Like,
I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
It's like, see how far I can go, which is pushing yourself again. But is it going to be a benefit to someone? Probably not.
Would you say it's a benefit to someone that is dysfunctional from an inflammation perspective?
Yeah. It's going to bring down inflammation without doubt. Yeah. But it's going to be peripheral. So it's going to be at the extremities like joint and muscle rather than anything internal. It's not going to affect asthma, for example. You've got an underlying level of inflammation in the lung. Getting into a cold plunge will do nothing for that. So, it might bring down inflammatory markers in other areas of your body, but that's, not going to do anything. It's a signal to certain things, but not for systemic inflammation. It's peripheral.
And that's, I suppose, where peptides would come in, right?
Yeah. So, things like the healing peptide BPC-157, obviously is that a healing peptide brings down inflammation really well, and it's systemic. So it's going to work everywhere. So that's not going to affect your ability to grow muscle or change the way you respond to stimulus. It's just going to do all the stuff you want without it affecting that in a negative way. But then other people they've had views on whether that's appropriate or not. They'd much rather get into an ice bath because it seems more natural. perhaps.
I think that the opinions on peptide use right now are interesting because just like everything else when it comes to nutrition science, exercise science, I feel like people like to go to extremes versus exploring nuance and appropriate setting and situation.
Yeah.
They like to paint something with one brush and say, this is good or this is bad.
Yeah. I've had a conversation quite a few times now, and I did a post on my Instagram page, and it was a lot of athletes that want to stay natural. I want to be a natural athlete. Can I use L-carnitine? And L-carnitine doesn't work orally whatsoever. It's pointless. Where stomach destroys it. So using it intramuscularly with an injection has amazing benefits. Increases VO2 max, increases biogenesis of mitochondria. It's a whole bunch of things that it does. It's amazing. So it's a real benefit, but it's 100% synthetic, but it's identical to the L-carnitine you find in food in your body. So there's been this like, I don't want to do that stuff because I'm not going to be natural anymore. But then we look at creatine, which has now become like super, effective. People use it all over the world. The most researched, supplement ever. And it's completely synthetic. It's just as synthetic as L-carnitine is. And then if someone's taken vitamin D, which tends to be made from lamb's wool or sheep's wool and affected by UVA radiation, that's not natural either. So if these guys have been taking creatine and vitamin D, for example, D3, you're not natural because you're doing other synthetic things. It's only because the administration route is with a syringe or a needle, they feel like they're taking drugs. And that's a misunderstanding of what they're doing, So I think that the idea of peptides is sometimes skewed. So you can take BPC 157, for example, way more effective if you do it subcutaneously or inject into a muscle or even directly into a tendon, for example. It's way more effective than taking it orally. It does work orally, but nowhere near as well. But I know a lot of people would feel less like they're doing something non-natural if they were to take a tablet rather than have an injection. So it's interesting how people feel about certain things,
Like the goalposts just keep moving, isn't it? Like, where do you draw the line?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Yeah. And it's like they might have a pretty amazing footballer that club's just paid £1 million for. He's hurt his ankle, he's sat on the bench, and they'll give him a cortisone injection and some ibuprofen and they get on the pitch. That's a prime example of drugs in sport. But you'd say he's a natural athlete. He's clearly not. So there's a fine line of like the way you perceive things as to be natural or not. It's so interesting.
It's really interesting because in that situation that you just described, like a cortisol injection, whether it's for an athlete or just a person who has chronic shoulder pain or an injury, that's an example of reactionary medicine. It's you wait for the injury and then you're using something to dull the pain or lessen the inflammation. And it's okay. But do you think it's something to do with like, if you're being proactive and you're choosing to say, use peptides in a proactive way to help your body, to strengthen your body, somehow that becomes just viewed in a different way?
Completely, yeah. And it's really interesting because a lot of people have like, for example, you might have an issue with visceral fat and there's very many types of peptides which are growth hormone secretagogues. So these peptides will cause your pituitary gland to pump out more growth hormone. So you're not taking exogenous growth hormone, your body's making more. You're stimulating your body to make more growth hormone, which we know declines as you get older. And we will see in some, older people, they get like a visceral fat deposition, which is the worst kind of fat you can have around your organs. And we know that there's like different types of growth hormone secretagogues that will work specifically on visceral fat. So you can combine, for example, BPC 157, bring down inflammation for that person who may be inflamed because carrying excess body fat also causes inflammation from the storage of body fat. So that's going to help to bring down inflammation. But not only that, BPC 157 increases your growth hormone receptor sensitivity. So now the growth hormone you make naturally, endogenously, is going to be more effective because BPC now is going to make that much more productive. But if you're actually adding in another peptide that's going to help to reduce visceral fat, then you're doing two really amazing things to then make your health way better. There's literally no side effects. Or you can not do that at all and then try and lose the body fat by other means, which is cool. But we can use what we have in front of us to make our lives much more effective and much better, live longer and live healthier. But then people have a different view on that. So, but the facts still remain the same. So as you can say, you can take that proactively. You have the visceral fat issue, but if you take BPC 157 on a regular basis, a very small amount at bedtime, for example, that's going to help you to eliminate that visceral fat, increase growth hormone sensitivity, it's going to make you sleep better. So all the things that we know about sleep are going to be improved because inflammation goes down, growth hormone sensitivity goes up, growth hormone helps you sleep, and you're going to start to heal your body in all aspects because sleep's better, growth hormones working more effectively, inflammation's coming down. And BPC 157 has been used globally now. I think this is where when I first met Katie, we were doing our show, she was competing and she had hurt her shoulder, and reactively we used BPC 157. You have to remind me what year that was, Katie, because it was a while ago and my old brain isn't functioning as well as it used.
Too long.
It was a long time ago. So yeah, let's not talk about how old we are. And then, or how old I am anyway. And we used BPC 157 for the shoulder, and Katie's Crohn's started to get better. So we'd worked really hard to get to a place where Katie was losing body fat. At the time, she was using oral prednisolone, which we know is very difficult for body fat loss, water loss, and so on. And because the Crohn's was starting to alleviate because of the BPC 157, we didn't have quite enough time to get in the show condition we could have done. But at some point, if we continued or started earlier, we could have possibly come off the whole prednisolone thing and achieved something different. So,
yeah. And it's amazing that there's been a lot of studies since that show exactly that in Crohn's patients. So,
yeah. So it was almost like by accident, which is where most medical discoveries come from. It is why licenses for medicine get changed all the time, because they're applied to a certain condition and then they realize it's actually way better at something else. And we found that out through trial and error with the shoulder. And that's exactly what we did. So, and then, there's lots of research now, BPC 157, healing heart cells and all sorts of stuff. It's incredible. So post heart surgery and stuff. So it's, So anyway, we're back on peptides again. So
I feel like it's such a large area, but it's also an area that is just not discussed enough in the slightest. And I don't know why.
No, I'm not sure either. I think people think it's new, and there's a general distrust of pharmaceutical companies, especially since we've had the incidents with a particular virus. The trust in medical companies has gone, and in trust in pharmaceuticals generally is lacking, which is completely understandable. So obviously I've worked in medicine for many years, but also now worked in health and nutrition as well. And there's a place, if it's right, for both things, and peptides bridge the gap. So again, with the peptide scenario, there's also, you still have to be doing the right things with your nutrition, with your sleep, and all the other things we know heal our bodies. This is an additional thing we can use to be really practical and help us once we've got other things in place as well. So it isn't just like peptides are the fix-all. They're great at some things. They work in some areas, but the underlying process is to get everything else right with your food and nutrition first. And then they're going to be everything's more effective when you're doing things right, as a human would need in the first place.
Yeah. Because I know that you believe that resistance training is one of the most underrated tools for preventing disease and also supporting mental health to some extent. But even when it comes to things like menopause, it's just not spoken about enough.
No. And I think as people get older, particularly females, they believe that they're becoming less able because they're feeling less able because of the menopause. So they'll lose muscle mass, bone density, and so on. And they will feel that the testosterone levels drop slightly, estrogen disappears, and you feel less capable and less like you want to go to the gym. And then metabolic dysfunction ensues because you start to go sarcopenia, lose muscle mass. And these are the sink holes for glucose. So this is where you're going to store your carbohydrates, and it's going to help you to not have the inflammation that comes from carbohydrate intakes. They're going to be stored effectively. Muscles and liver are where they are used. And if you have more muscle mass, but more importantly, strong muscles also store more carbohydrates. They don't have to be huge, just the different glycolytic fiber types. As you train, your fiber types develop differently, and the different fiber types will use more carbohydrates and store them. So as someone moves into menopause, it's even more important to train, because we know that carbohydrates and the misuse of insulin and all that sort of stuff, that derangement leads on to other issues, which have now been sort of kind of like incorrectly termed type 3 diabetes, which is Alzheimer's and dementia and that kind of stuff, because of the effect that the carbohydrates and the sugars have on the brain. So as we move into menopause, it's super important that someone trains. And, it's a real blessing when I train elderly women, because they still make huge progress and they're still super active and they're super able. And when they start getting stronger, we're reversing that aging process of muscle, and they're storing carbohydrates better and everything works better. Great. And sharper as well. There's loads of evidence to support it. But I think sometimes the gym's an intimidating place, which we need to change for people, particularly females. But it's fundamental for having a healthy life is to resistance train in some form or another. Doesn't mean to be a bodybuilder. It's hilarious how people think they're going to go to the gym and just become Olympian bodybuilders like in 3 weeks.
That still makes me laugh when I hear that. And I still hear that on a regular basis from friends, from clients. Like, I don't want to get bulky though. And I'm like, believe me, it's not that easy to get bulky. In fact, it's quite hard to get bulky as a woman usually. But it's so interesting that I have this kind of theory about how we've been taught as women to try to be as small as possible, to try and have as low body fat or body weight as possible. And I think that's starting to shift now. I have a 16-year-old daughter who has a gym membership, and her TikTok feed is all about like that gym life, which is great. I think it's fantastic that kids are starting earlier and learning earlier. But if I think back to when I was younger, even though I started training at 16, my underlying goal for probably the first 20 years of my training was to be smaller.
Yeah.
Was to be thinner, leaner, weigh as little as possible. And it wasn't until I hit my mid-30s that I actually changed my outlook on that and was like, actually, I want to weigh more because I want to have more muscle mass, because I know what that muscle mass is going to do to protect me and my longevity for the rest of my life.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think the earlier we can start, the better. I think there's as much as like social media influences people, sometimes in a negative way, there's some really other positives about it. Some of the phrases like strong, not skinny are really useful, because that is exactly where people should be trying to get, and to be strong, because being weak is dangerous. One of my clients who is 65, she thought she'd failed miserably at one point because she was jumping onto a block and stepping off. So doing, dynamic jumps, and she jumped onto the block and basically slipped off of it and fell over, and then rolled onto her back and then stood up. And I was just elated that she was able to roll.
That she could do that
and get straight back up again. Because I'm like, do you understand what's just happened? She's like, yeah, I messed it up. I said, no, you didn't. It's exactly why we're training, because you're strong and resilient enough to fall over off like a 7-inch step, land on the ground, roll up and stand. And you haven't broken your hip, and you haven't broken, you're in a really good place. And that was a really good example of how the resilience of strength training and having some strength and muscle mass and bone density is so important. And I don't think she could quite understand how exciting it was and why. I was just excited that she fell over and got back up again. And I said, you are not going to be that person that breaks their hip and be in that percentage of women that died a year later. You're not going to be that person on my watch. And that kind of thing really excites me. So I think, the whole menopausal situation is very also not talked about properly either. I have a client at the moment who is clearly perimenopausal. We've got all the symptoms. She's very, very depressed, really depressed. And it's working to try and get our health service to work with her. She's 42. Because she's not 45, it's a massive uphill battle for her to get any support or help. So I went to the doctor's surgery with her this week. We had an appointment. And even though I quoted the NICE guidelines, which is what in England we go on, the NICE guidelines, which suggests that even though blood tests may be in the right range or low, that symptoms trump the blood tests. And in spite of that, they still were refusing to give her HRT, even though she clearly needs it. And they're going to write a letter to consultant and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, how long is this going to take? This has been 3-4 months already, and it's unsustainable. And interestingly enough, because I went with her and I posed as her partner, because we were going to have some obviously intimate conversations about her symptoms, the doctor was like, well, I know why you're here. And I'm like, why is that? Well, obviously, her libido is low, isn't it? And I was like, yes, it is. And that's exactly what she said. And she just thought there's one reason why I'm there, because of my own interests in that part of the relationship. And I just was so taken aback. And I said to her, is it unreasonable for me to want to be part of my partner's health journey and see her fit and well? And she was like, no. And I said, well, why don't we move forward with this? And when I quoted the NICE guidelines, she kind of took a little bit of a backseat and realized that we knew what we were talking about. But even still was fighting tooth and nail not to help us. And it was incredible. And this is the state of some of the inconsistencies with the healthcare service that we have in this country. And for someone like her to try and get to the gym and getting some gains in that place is really difficult, because she doesn't feel like she wants to go to the gym. And that's where some of the issues are. But we could turn it around. We're going to get it. We're going to get there in the end. But it's just very interesting that the current thinking is not where it should be for us over here anyway. In this country, it's not great.
Yeah.
So,
and North America is no different. I think this is becoming a worldwide problem. And I don't know how we turn this around with our healthcare. It almost feels like definitely in Canada, we have such a huge doctor shortage and such poor quality of care that I feel like we're on the verge of collapse, of breaking. And maybe that's what needs to happen before we can start building something real that actually helps people.
Yeah, I used to get quite a bit frustrated by the fact that there was a big gap between what the healthcare service was providing and what my clients needed and what people need generally. And I was kind of like a little bit, frustrated the fact that I would have to step in and help them, because I shouldn't need to do that. But actually, it's really actually important, because we can make better decisions, more informed decisions, rather than just seeing this person as a number or as just a patient and then, give them some medication and out the door. Whereas we can do way more for them. And when they want to apply themselves, we can be such a pivotal point in their journey back to health. It's actually a blessing rather than the issue that I thought it was. So it's actually giving me a lot of satisfaction to be able to help people like that.
Yeah. And you've helped so many people that have PCOS and autoimmune conditions, obesity, hormone imbalance. And I'd love to know what mindset patterns you see most often in kind of those struggling to change.
I think it's some people, they say they want to change, but they don't. They'll talk a good game and they say they want to do these things. And it's but when the rubber hits the road, they're not really fully bought into it. And it's sometimes, I see a lot of people. So let's talk, the obesity thing is a really easy one to talk about, because people become the fat person. They become this identity, which is they've always been fat. They're going to be fat, and they own their fatness almost to a degree. And it's well, I can help you change that. And they'll see other people being successful. And then they feel the pressure of, what if I don't make it? What if I'm not successful? And there's a fear of failure that comes along with their situation. And they're thinking, but what if it doesn't work for me? Everything I've tried doesn't work for me. This may not work for me. So I'm not even going to bother starting. And it's well, let's have a look at your blood, see what's going on, see if there's any dysfunctions, see if there's any things that are missing that we can help, put right. And they also have who am I if I'm not the fat person? They're actually like, their identity is being this person now. So a lot of people that I've met who are disabled, and some of the guys that came from the army who have got limbs missing, they are now that person. When they were in the military, for example, I've gone sideways a little bit here, but it's to prove a point or to explain a point, is that they were a highly skilled operative. That was their thing. They were highly decorated. They were that person that had identity in the military. And they could progress through the ranks. Then they leave the military and they're injured. They've got a leg missing. And they're like, well, who am I going to be now? What is my identity? I'm not that Marine or that Special Forces guy anymore. I've lost all that. So who am I? Oh, I'm the guy with the leg missing. And they actually become that person. And if you try to help them, they don't want to know, because they want to stay that. That's a new identity that they feel comfortable with. And similarly, some of the people that I try and help, they've become this, I can't do this because I have this problem. And I can't do that because I'm overweight, and nothing ever works for me. And it becomes who they are. So it's like, you've got to try to change their belief mechanism to say, this is not who you are. The person you are is completely different to the way you're living your life. And sometimes overcoming that is very, very difficult. But as soon as we get a bit of traction, that changes. And, when you see someone actually progress and move forward, it's a real blessing. And the character changes as well. So it isn't just about the physical change you see in somebody who is overweight or has PCOS and is, struggling. It's the change in their character, because they're not that girl anymore or that guy. And one of the girls that recently, we discussed, she came to the gym, and for the first time about 2 months ago, she didn't wear a hat and she had a hoodie on. We were halfway through a workout, she took her hat off, but took her hoodie down. And it was the first time she's been to the gym without wearing a hairpiece or a hat or covering her head, because her hair is now growing back. And she had about the same amount of hair as I've got. And it was for her horrendous. So, that was a situation where she wasn't identifying as a girl with PCOS particularly. So she could then go, I want to move forward with this, and then did. So there's guys that are really wanting to change and they'll invest in it. And there's the other people that are really unsure and then don't know what it's going to mean for them if they do change and they're attached to it. I think when we see a lot of people talk about, I'm a 9/11 survivor. Oh, I thought you were called Dave and you work in a bank. But no, I'm a 9/11 survivor. So that's their identity now. And it's really hard to let go of. And I see that in some people with illnesses. So we've got to try and work on their psychology as well.
Yeah, we did a lot of that work when we first met, didn't we?
Yeah.
I remember vividly.
Yeah.
And not allowing Crohn's to be my identity.
Yeah, because it was, I think, remember you were saying, I've got Crohn's. And I'm like, don't own it. You're making it, you're owning that stuff. You're saying it's mine. I have Crohn's. I have this. This is mine. And it's like, no, I'm not having. So even the language we were using at the time was different. So it doesn't have to be yours. And now it is, which is amazing. It's so cool. And it's like, I don't have kidney failure. It's not me. I'm not a kidney patient anymore. I'm not. So it's like that change in language is so important, and it's powerful, But I think the more we share our stories, the more other people can be inspired by us. So all the steps that I've made, and what we're doing now by doing this podcast is talking about the steps we've been through, our experiences, and then showing what you can do, which is completely positive. And it's so important to send that message, because our lifestyles we could have ended up in a different place entirely. And I think the more we talk about where we're at and what we've done, the more it's going to help other people. So, and they have our guidance now as well, which is what we didn't have that for ourselves a lot of the time. We did stuff blindly and had to research things ourselves. It took a lot longer. So,
yeah. What's one thing you wish more people understood about healing that doctors don't always tell you?
It's your responsibility. You can do it.
Mm.
If you are able to understand the cause, I think the thing is, it's like, there's a really good saying, which is, if you want to get well, you have to remove the things that made you sick in the first place. So it's identifying those things and then removing them. So I've got somebody who wants to come on board with me. And I said, are you still smoking and still drinking? Yes. Well, unless you give those things up, then they're the toxic things in your body. You're not going to get well while you're still polluting your body. So we need to work on the addictions you have, which is psychological and sometimes physiological as well. We need to work on those things first before your health will improve. So you've got to give up those things that made you sick first. That's super important.
We talk a lot about that, don't we, Mando? You can't heal in the same environment that made you sick.
Yeah, I think that going back to what you said about identity of being sick, being a sick person, I see so much of that in the chronic illness communities online. And like you said, I think it's most rooted in fear of not reaching those goals, not achieving that, because we tend to like to stay where we're most comfortable, even if that comfort is discomfort.
Yes. Yeah. I think I tend to like, when I have clients come on board, even regular gym going clients, I'll do a character profile so I can see if they're an avoider and what kind of person they are. So we can see their avoidance, or if they're competitive. So I can use that information to use them to challenge them, but in the right way. Because if someone's an avoider, they're just going to shut down and go back into their avoiding behavior they're comfortable with and then not move forward. So you've got to be, the way you work with those guys is very different to the guys that are very competitive and always want to succeed at stuff. You have to challenge them, but they have to have a level of success as well. Otherwise, they'd be demotivated. So the way you work with them is very different. So I think that understanding that person and what they require is also super important. So the psychological aspects of developing strategies is so rooted in their success as well. But identity is very interesting. And that's where I thought I was going to lose mine. So having the situation I was in, I was going to lose my identity completely. And I had to come to terms with the fact that I was going to be a different person, possibly. And then how is that going to affect the people around me? And how that would affect me generally. So I think there is a fear of failure again in aspects of even healing and getting better.
That part's really interesting. Can you walk us through how you use psychology and how you would classify new clients and how you would work with the different classifications?
Yeah, so I'll give them a pretty standard test, which will ask them a number of questions, and it's a multi-choice kind of thing. So it's pretty simple, but they'll come upon a scale of avoider, procrastinator, or competitor, that kind of thing. So I get an insight into what can possibly drive them. And it's interesting because one of the ladies I work with is super competitive, but yet when I set challenges for her in the gym, she wouldn't attempt because her fear of failure was so great. She wouldn't want to go there, but she's super competitive and she really wants to win stuff. But in light of the fact she might fail, she won't even attempt it. And the comment was, set me tasks, but don't tell me about them. Set me goals and challenge me, but I don't want to know what they are. So then she could be unwillingly sort of challenged, but then be successful without only know the result if she's been successful. So it was it's very interesting. And so you don't want to turn a client off. So going through that process of understanding who that person is and then trying stuff with them, you can see them, as you talked about, go back into their familiar behavior because it's comfortable for them. So an avoider, I have a few of those. So when I start getting them to do certain exercises, there's one, a leg press exercise, for example, I've put a measurement on the side of the leg press so I can see how far they're bringing the leg press down. There's a measurement, a tape measure on the side of it. And when the avoider starts putting weight on, she'll bring it all the way down, but a bit more weight on, which I know she's capable of, comes down halfway. I'm like, that's 3 inches less deep than the last set you did. No, it's not. No, it really is. I've just seen it. I can film it for you. No, it's not. And she'll completely disagree with the fact that it's not coming down all the way. So then it's like, okay, right, I need to make a strategy now of how I'm going to deal with this person and where she believes things are happening. Because the perception is she's doing the same amount of work, which is actually not. So dealing with that person's goal setting is then very different to the competitive person. So it just allows me to then pitch my sort of like goals for that person's development very differently. One of the things I see is, I think it is because a lot of people can do their normal daily life, not be challenged. And for me, when I say to people, come to the gym with me, this is like the one time in the week sometimes they get to be brave, because they're not challenged really in any other way, physically particularly. So it's when you're under a lot of weight in a leg press, you need to be brave because you think it's going to fall on you. So I'm like, this is your chance this week to show some bravery, which is a human trait we needed, like, to our, development in the planet. So this is a time to be brave and challenge yourself. Some people rise to that challenge and some people don't, based upon their characteristics. So the challenge has to be appropriate to that person's character. And then that sort of like teasing that out takes a while. And then when you get spot on, it's kind of cool. But I found that when I speak to CEOs, so quite powerful guys who get spoken to in a very respectful way consistently because they are the boss, when I speak to them, that's not how I speak to them. And nobody speaks to them like the way I speak to them. And they're horrified, absolutely horrified. And they're like, you can see their face going, you can't speak to me like that because, and I'm like, because of what? Why? I'm challenging you. And it's like, I've had a couple of guys who need help and they're CEOs of companies. So when I work out who they are as a person, I'll then change the way I speak to them. So I had one guy's blood test results and I said to him, in your role, what do you do? He says, I look at strategy for different companies and I work out what we need to employ as a strategy to get that company to work, see where that company is going to be in 5 years or maybe 6 years. And is it going to be profitable? And how are we going to change different departments to make it work? And that's really cool. So I said, so when I talk about strategy in companies and how things are going to take place and how they're going to manipulate things to make it function. So I said, if you've got a company that has got the HR department is like really on its last legs, the sales team are underperforming, we've got really like nobody in the warehouse pulling their weight, the management team's terrible. And then paint a picture of this particular company. Where do you think this company's going to be in 5 years? I was going to go bankrupt. It's not going to be there anymore. Well, so would you invest in that company? Not at all. No, it's just pointless. Okay. Well, these are your blood test results. This is your HR department. Oh, it's in the red. Here's the sales team not performing. You are that company. So I'm telling you now, in 5 years, you are going to be bankrupt. That's your body. We're going to be bankrupt in 5 years. We need to form a strategy right now. And they're like, but it's their language.
You just put it in language that they could understand.
We need to save this company. We've got to do something now. It's no time to mess about. And then I say to them, what you don't change, you choose. And then we'll end the conversation with them and leave them to think about it. But no one speaks to them like that. And I think one of the guys, this is always hits a man very hard. So we've been having a nice conversation about life in general and stuff. And I'm like, so, how's work going? That kind of stuff. And I'll drop in, do you still get an erection in the morning? And there's silence. And sorry, what? Do you still get an erection in the morning? And no, but that's normal because I'm 43. And I'm like, okay, I'm 54. I'm good. Okay. That's a sign about your libido. It's a sign. And that kind of stuff digs straight into a man's macho image in there. I said, when you go home to your missus at the end of the night, you've had a long day at work. I'm sure she likes cuddles, but you've got a relationship you need to work on. Intimacy is super important. What do you think is going to happen in your relationship? There's no intimacy. Obviously, it comes in different forms as well. Well, I'm digging in, and no one's spoken to a CEO guy like this ever. Mm-hmm. And he feels almost offended by it. But it's like, he can't get away with that comment. And it's like, it's a sign you need to do something about your health because you're still young. You still have a life to live. You still have a family and a wife. And there's things you need to be doing as a person. And that kind of conversation, when I realize who that person is, I know where I can take it. And I've never speak to an avoidant like that because they're just going to close up and never speak to me again. Probably never speak to or see me again. So it's like that kind of understanding of who that person is also is a shortcut to like earning the right to speak to people that way. So I wouldn't speak to everybody that way, but when it's appropriate, it wakes people up because they've just been doing the same thing for the last like 10 years. So it's so interesting. But that then I have a safety net because I pretty much get an idea of how they're going to respond. And it may seem harsh, but it's a wake up call to lots of people.
I think that just perfectly illustrates the fact that like you're doing the work to learn about your clients and work with them in a way that's going to benefit them, and recognizing that they are bio-individual. You're not just giving them a one-size-fits-all protocol. And I think that the practitioners who get the best results with people are practitioners that understand that people need to be treated as individuals. And you can't just hand somebody a protocol and expect them to just follow it because you said so.
Yeah, it's similar. I think it comes from a background in strength and conditioning, because when you look at an athlete, you may have an athlete that's very, very strong, but not very fast. And then you have an athlete that's very, very fast, but not very strong. So you look at their qualities physically and also mentally, and your training, that your needs analysis it's like a diagnosis of what that person needs to become a better athlete. So you wouldn't give a strong athlete more deadlifts and more strength work to do because they're already strong. You give them speed work and a different type of training based on what they need. And that's the foundation of how to get the best out of an athlete. And similarly, when we start looking at someone with health issues, we have to do the same thing. Nobody is the same, although we're the same species and we respond similarly to stimulus. There's still big differences. And we have to be good and courteous enough to look at them as a single person and work on those needs for that person. And then it works really well because they see the change for themselves. But, and then I think when they're comfortable with that, they can ask questions as well. I think that questioning part is really important. So, but I think you earn the right by being open, honest, and working with that person, showing an interest in that person's needs, allows them to be open with you as well. So it's a two-way street, I think, for you to develop that relationship by understanding who that person is before and when you start. And I think that's probably where a lot of my successful people has come from, is I've landed a good ability to create a good rapport with people and trust with them. So there have been, incidences where people have been very honest about their health issues. And I sometimes take a look at myself in the mirror thinking, I'm surprised that someone would even approach me and talk to me about that. I've got young guys talking about low testosterone levels and low libido issues. And I'm looking at my demeanor and sometimes my appearance. I'll be the last person I'll speak to about that. And then I have females talking about I'm saying a certain contraceptive, I feel really bad on it. What do you think? And I think that has come from being completely honest about my journey, buys a lot of trust in that person, because we're all adults as well. We can speak openly about stuff and there's no embarrassment, So I think that's the way it works really well. So understanding your client, doing some psychometric tests and seeing what they kind of like as characters allows you to temper the way you speak and what questions you ask.
If someone feels broken or dysfunctional or like their body is working against them, what's the first mindset shift that they need to make?
The belief that they can change. They have the power. They are in control of their destiny. I think that if you have the belief that you are in charge of your own life, then you can try stuff. It's like trying and failing is not a problem. You've got options. If you believe everything you're told by people who don't know you, they don't take the time to understand who you are, then you're not going to believe you can actually change. And you can. There's small things you can do. And you're made out of, and one of the things I talk about, this is obviously physiological, but you're made out of food, water, air, and light. And that's what makes you who you are with the DNA that you have. So you reproduce based on your DNA. But even that doesn't control you, So, you express parts of your genetic code depending on the circumstances you place it in. So if you're feeding your body with all the right things, your body is going to express all the good genes that you have. You're not going to stimulate the negative ones. So they're covered. A lot of the stuff that we have in our genetic profile, we may have genes for pancreatic cancer or, something else laying dormant in our genes that have been passed down through our family. But we're not expressing them right now because we haven't stimulated them. They're covered in a protein sheath, and they're only stimulated if we do certain types of things. So the environment we place ourselves in or we create inside our bodies is super important. And obviously food does that and the environment does that. So you're in control of where you put yourself, what water you drink, what food you eat, and what air you breathe. That's all, up to you, and you can change that. And there are many times where I will say to somebody, oh, I feel broken, and it's a journey. We're all on a journey. You may feel, broken or damaged or, flawed. We're all flawed. So, but it's now what we choose to do with it. And you have the power to change if you really want to. And if you're willing to do that, then, I'll help you. So it's making that step. It's like a brave thing to do sometimes. It's scary. I talk about, my clients all know I've been seeing a lady I'm working with now, called Ellen McChrystal, who's a therapist, and she's an amazing lady. And she's helped me through. I think one of the things that is really fundamental to this conversation actually is that I started to see Ella. I wanted to work with her in business. And then I realized that I should actually go and spend some time with her as a client, because I've worked so many years on my body. I needed to do some mind work, work on my actual character and my mental processing and where I'm at. And I've been with her for 4 years. And the initial sort of therapy sessions we were having was about entirely different subject matters. And then I got my diagnosis, and the things that I learned about self-reflection and my mental state and how I view things and the way my brain functions and me as a person allowed me to be more resilient when I got those diagnoses, because that built me from the character base and my, psychology upwards. And that really helped me get through those issues. So that was super important. And I think that I've explained and I've been completely open about my journey with that part of my life as well. And from that, many of my clients and people who know me have gone to seek some help as well with counseling, because we're all flawed. We've all got things we can work on and we can all deal with things better. And I think that a lot of the times that we are triggered, we tend to do as people is go, tell your partner or someone, don't press my buttons. Can you avoid doing that, please? Don't do that. It's going to trigger me. When instead we should be able to allow those triggers to happen, but deal with them so much better. So they're no longer triggers. Rather than avoid them, we deal with the triggers and they're not triggers anymore. And I think that is super important as well. And I think that the development that you can show that you've put work in, both mentally and physically, really help that person see who you are and help them to grow and say, you know what, this is possible. You've done it and I can do it. And also you're there to help me. So I think that mind switch is about, I have the power to change if I want to. And that's and that bit of stubbornness as well. Get stubborn.
Yeah, I love that. And I love your holistic approach, that you're not just looking at one thing. You're not just teaching people how to lift weights in the gym. You're helping them with their mental health, their mindset, their belief in themselves. It's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. Just on that, my brand I started in my mind years ago was called Ministry of Iron. The idea being that the iron, the weightlifting, is a purpose for ministry. So I can then help people through iron, and that's how I engage with them to begin with. So it isn't just about weightlifting. It's a medium that allows me to touch people, to touch their lives and change them, hopefully for the better. So yeah, it's never been just about weightlifting, but that's the reason. So yeah, you call your bits upon that.
Yeah. So how can people get in touch with you if they want to reach out?
So I've got an Instagram account, which is Ministry of Iron, which is kind of like the bodybuilding fitness kind of page. And I've got John Buckland Coaching, which is the health side of things, where I deal with people, and you can get through me through Katie as well, through Clean Nutrition. So we can talk about, all the health issues we talk about, menopause and PCOS, endometriosis and arthritis and all those kind of things we can deal with. So yeah, I'd be happy to help anybody.
Beautiful.
So thanks for having me as well. This has been really nice. I really enjoyed it.